Cops, how can you tell genuinely suspicious people from self-conscious idiots acting all weird? Cops once woke me up at 3 a.m. in the morning because my neighbor saw flashlights in the woods next to my house, and they started questioning me, asking me why I seemed so nervous, and if I wasn't doing anything, why were there footprints in the snow in front of my frickin' front door? I was a 19-year-old kid living on my own in a small town, so small it didn't have a population. I just remember being absolutely flabbergasted at why they would want to know why someone might be nervous from getting a visit from the cops in the middle of the night and why they thought footprints in a heavily traveled area was suspicious. I basically told them some variation of that and then told them they were welcome to look around outside if they wanted before they left. This was during deer hunting season in Wisconsin, so the only thing I could think of is that maybe they thought there was some poaching going on. Still, it showed a remarkable detachment from reality that they couldn't understand why I was so nervous to begin with. Yes, the classic footprints in front of the door kind of crime. Clearly a mastermind criminal who forgot how doors work. Story 2. There's a bit in Bryan Cranston's book where he talks about his time as a security guard. His talent was spotting about to be shoplifters. His advice? People come to stores because they want something specific. In and out. Watch for the lingerers. Story 3. I got pulled over for speeding on Canada Day on my way up to Ottawa from Toronto. I did the usual routine of pulling over somewhere safe, taking the registration out, and putting both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. The cop approaches, and I ask if it's okay for me to reach over and turn down the music, which I forgot to do. He starts laughing and says, okay. He tells me to put my hands down since I'm making him nervous. I'm like, you're making me nervous. Back in Toronto, I don't take any chances, and the cops are usually appreciative. But they have never told me to relax. It's best to err on the side of caution with Toronto police. But the out-of-city cops are usually pretty laid back. We had a good old Canadian laugh and wished each other a happy Canada Day, and then he gave me a ticket for 115 and a 100. Sigh. Story 4. I've only had one bad instance with a cop who was convinced I was up to no good. He asked me what I was doing, and I told him. He asked me why I took a specific exit before my destination, and I mentioned I needed gas. He said, well, you've got an answer for everything, don't you? Yes, sir, it's not that difficult when it's the truth. He ended up having me wait outside the car for half an hour while he went over with a K-9 unit. After I refused to let him search, I didn't want to have to reorganize everything after he rummaged through it. I had nothing to hide. Then when the dog found nothing, he searched the car anyway because I seemed nervous because I was sweating. After standing in the Texas sun in August for 30 minutes, I filed a complaint and was pretty much told, too bad, our officers are risking their lives for you every day, and people shouldn't be questioning their authority. Story 5. Cop here. I'll give a serious answer instead of all the others. Assuming this is on a traffic stop for the most part, if you are acting jumpy, I'd try to figure out why and remove that stress. If I can't figure it out on my own, I'll just simply ask. Common answers are, I don't like cops, I don't want a ticket, and so on. My reasoning for this is if you're relaxed and I ask if there are any weapons in the car and your stress indicators skyrocket when you say no, something is wrong. If you're already stressed, I won't be able to see that reaction. As others have stated, it's not 100%. Some people are just nervous Nellies. I try to calm people down for their sanity and my safety, but it doesn't always work. Story 6. Not a cop, but I'm a Florida native and I'm usually dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. I was in a flyover stay for a concert and was supposed to pick someone up about 4 hours away in the morning. Instead of getting a hotel for 5 hours, I decided to drive to my destination and sleep in the back of the rental car. Usually when I do this, I roll the windows down and sleep with the car off, but it was in the mid-30s this night. I pulled into a vacant parking lot next to a vacant building outside of town. Turns out I was still in city limits. I tried to turn the running lights off, but wasn't able to. This eventually attracted the attention of the local law enforcement. I woke to a flashlight banging on my window. They, all 9 of them, wanted me out of the car while they tried to figure out what was going on. Being as it was cold, I started to shake. I shared how I thought it was amusing that I was shaking and that it would likely raise suspicion. The cop that was babysitting me at that moment said, no, it's cold out. She then let me get into the car and started again. 9 out of 10, would recommend. Story 7. Police instructor here, you look for what is out of place or context. If everyone is looking at an event or a certain direction, and that one person is staring at you or in the completely opposite direction, that's the oddball. People draw attention to themselves by behavior that is different from the environment or expected of the environment that they are in. It's how they identified the Boston bombers. Everyone was looking in the direction of the explosion, but the brothers were staring in the opposite direction. Suspicious behavior. This technique can be applied to clothing as well. If it's summer and you see people wearing heavy jackets, there's something odd. Somebody keeps tapping the waistline, and there's no reason for him to do that, like something falling off of it and there's something tucked in their waistline. Now, I'm not saying that this gives you an excuse to go up and start pestering people. However, it is definitely letting you narrow down the focus of your attention for what is out of place. Story 8. UK police officer here. There is no single factor, but here are a few things I'd look for. Quote unquote, police aware is an expression we use. Most people feel guilty and try to act normal around the police, which normally means pretending we're not there. For example, you begin to concentrate on eating that sandwich to an almost comic extent while sneaking the odd look to see what we're doing. Then you have the people who stop what they're doing and watch you intently to see if you're coming for them. These are the people who are police aware. Of course, sometimes they're just tourists hoping to take a sneaky photo of a British copper. Mostly, it's people whose appearance or manner doesn't fit in. For example, if you go to a busy taxi rank at rush hour and then just casually mooch about rather than queuing or leaving, then that's an odd thing to do. If you walk into an expensive shop wearing tatty clothes and with ingrained dirt on your hands, then that's an odd thing to do. If you walk into a bar, order a drink, then leave it on the counter, then that's an odd and probably means you're either passing counterfeit money or pickpocketing thing to do. None of these things is illegal, but they're all things that are not entirely normal and would attract the eye of an observant police officer. Don't misinterpret these examples as looking scruffy. That's not what I mean at all. It's not about fitting in because of your context, not just a sudden bout of, I'm normal, from someone who clearly has a reason to be where they are. Visible signs of substance abuse. Sometimes in the UK, you'll hear the term substance diet, but the same would be true for substances in the US. You can spot them from a mile away because they have the same look and behaviors. Without wishing to tar all of them with the same brush, hard habits and acquisitive crime can often go hand in hand, so when I see someone who is clearly a user, I'm immediately interested in them. Lastly, there's intelligence. A lot of what we do is guided by specific knowledge about an area. In some areas, I'll be looking out for teenage kids hanging around bike racks. In others, I'll be looking out for users meeting dealers. And others still, I'll be looking for bag thieves amongst drinkers. Anyone who matches the sort of person who I'm on the lookout for, who also looks jumpy, is going to pique my interest, but normal people, less so. Sorry, such a rambling answer. The truth is, there are many factors, and it just depends. Story 9. Random story. So, not long after I got my license, I was driving around, and at a stoplight, there was a cop behind me. I hadn't done anything wrong. Cops at that point didn't freak me out yet. And I even knew a kid in school who was planning to become one. The light turns green and I go. I notice behind me, everyone is behind the cop on all lanes. It weirded me out. Usually there are cars passing me or next to me. People were giving the cop a nice wide berth or at least not wanting to drive ahead of it. It made me feel paranoid and I checked my speed. I was actually going slower than the speed limit. After I figured out everyone was just being paranoid, I sped up to the speed limit and that was that. The cop was driving slower than the speed limit and I drove off, leaving them all behind. I feel like the cop probably thought it was hilarious that his presence was slowing down traffic, because it wasn't like he was trying to control it. His lights weren't on. Since then, I've had plenty of speeding tickets. Plenty. But not on that day. Cops freak me out now, too. Ha! Every time I see one, I go, crap, speed limit? I'm okay. Car functioning, right? Yes, substance in the car? Wait, I don't do substance. It's a pretty tense situation. Story 10. I have anxiety. Every time a cop pulls me over, I look guilty, but really, I'm scared of unwarranted police violence, and I'm nervous about how much money today's ticket will cost me. Police always notice, and they always say that makes me suspicious, so they have reason to ask to search me and my possessions. I feel like I can't be the only innocent person in the world who gets jumped around by police, but they always act like I'm the first person they've ever encountered who acts guilty, when I haven't actually done anything. Yeah, the pre-ticket anxiety defense, a classic yet tragically ineffective strategy. Story 11. I had a similar thing happen when I was 17, went through a roadblock, had the cop ask where we were going, to which I said, just out for a drive. He did not like that response and demanded several times where we were going and where we came from. We came from my house and we're going for a drive. When the answer didn't change, he started yelling at me, causing me to panic, which escalated to crying, hyperventilating, and generally just freaking out. He made me pull off to the side, interrogated me for 10 minutes, gave me a ticket, can't remember what for, and then wouldn't let me leave because I was upset. I tried explaining to him I just needed a minute alone to calm down, and he flatly refused to give it to me. Stood beside my car, staring at me and aggressively asking questions. At one point, well into him being aggressive off to the side, he asked what my problem was. I made the mistake of saying sometimes the police make me nervous. He launched into a rant about how police are here to help and protect us. There's no reason to be scared unless you're doing something wrong. It was messed up. When he finally let us go, I dropped my friend off and went home myself. I didn't stop shaking for quite some time. Story 12. Great question. I'm a cop in Arizona. It's important to know the cultural and societal norms of your patrol area. A huge amount of folks carry guns here, for example. Your average law-abiding citizen will generally use a holster and not be deceptive about the weapon. Bad guys will not be forthcoming. We have some issues with Mexican manufacturers and they tend to blend in somewhat, but have guns in unique calibers such as a .38 Super. Since we do have a huge Hispanic community, it helps to know the norms for their behavior, which differs somewhat from the white community. A vast majority of the time, we will be dealing with people while investigating specific crimes. There's a huge variety of factors involved in that, but generally speaking, you are going to use 4 of your senses to make educated guesses: sight, smell, touch, and sound. A person whose voice wavers may just be afraid of cops. Combine that with an odor of substance or suspicious stuff on their body, then there could be an issue. While cultural knowledge is important, there are some universal signs of deception, which you would probably recognize. I spent a year in Afghanistan doing police work as well, and those principles held true there too. To a degree, it's profiling, which is a dirty word, but a pragmatic principle. Story 13. Some people don't know what to do when they're pulled over, having been pulled over myself. What goes through your head? Crap, I'm going to be late for work. My wife is going to be angry. Then you start scrambling for your license and registration. If you happen to have it in your car, which you might not, call me an idiot, go ahead. You take off your seatbelt for comfort. The radio is still on because you're so flustered. As a cop approaches, he can see your hands moving around. You can hear the music. You can see your body move down to the passenger seat as your whole body fades out of view. This is all innocent to you because you're just trying to comply and get out of this ticket if you can talk your way out. But what can the officer expect? That said, my experiences were different from videos I've seen of others being fired at traffic stops. I'm a white male in the suburbs of Chicago. I think we're kidding ourselves if we say that that doesn't make a difference. Let's just say cops get the training they need. Let's say drivers do everything they know to do. Do drivers know what cops are taught to expect a driver to do? How can drivers know what cops are taught? It's not on the driver's test. Beyond potential racism, I think this is a fundamental disconnect that would benefit us all. Story 14. Last night, while I was driving, I got to a red light, stopped next to a cop. I paid him no mind. He slid his car forward about a foot. I glanced to my left. He has his head tilted down, facing my direction. He gives me this dirty look like he was trying to see if he recognizes me from somewhere. I felt kind of weird. Usually whenever I see a cop, I'll give them a nod, a downward nod. Not like when I see a friend or somebody I know, that's when I give an upward nod. I can't explain it, but to me, there's a big difference between the two. To me, it feels like an upward nod is saying like, what's up, or even a challenging acknowledgement to a stranger. A downward nod is more like a neutral acknowledgement to greet somebody with respect. Story 15. Ex-cop, still licensed, if that matters. You can't always tell, and that is why treating everyone as close to the same as possible is important. The average person will change their behavior around a police officer at least a little bit. It can be a weird or over-respectful type of deal, or they may shut down completely. The average criminal acts nearly the same. However, that is why it's important to be very aware of the person's movements and responses to questions or your own movements. If you ask a person with substances in the car, "Do you have substances in the car?" his eyes will very commonly dart towards where he or she is hiding something, even if it is not substance. That, of course, does not give me probable cause to tear their car apart looking for stuff. It's just a red flag. A person who is simply nervous and is not really guilty of a crime will most likely just break eye contact and look somewhere, such as out the window, behind you, down at the wheel, etc. Same goes for a person you may simply be suspicious of on the street. Are you carrying any weapons? Will lead to a person carrying a weapon too often touch the area where it is, usually repeatedly, or start to look at where they have a hidden weapon. A person who is just nervous probably won't grab their waistband several times after that question. That is just one example, but it shows the importance of communication, being aware of the surroundings and subject, and why asking questions is very important. All because a person who is simply nervous and a criminal who is nervous are almost indistinguishable without some digging. As for people who appear totally 100% calm, well, that in and of itself can be a red flag as well. Maybe he or she is calm because they like police. Maybe they are police in a different area. Maybe they really do simply have nothing to hide and a good understanding of police procedures. Or they are a hardened criminal that has no sense of remorse or anxiety over meeting a cop. You never know unless you start to look deeper. So, to anyone who feels like cops hate you or are mean, maybe that sheds a bit of light on things. Story 16. Detective here. Nervousness is not a sign of guilt, it's a sign of nervousness. Everyone responds to different situations differently, and some people get nervous around cops no matter how innocent or guilty they feel. I've watched other cops argue the point that a suspect must be guilty based on their nervous behavior, so I know some cops think that way. I think it's usually newer officers, stupid officers, or officers who have less experience dealing with people who think it's a good idea to link nervousness with guilt. I wish I knew a way to teach other cops that nervousness is a poor indicator of guilt and should never be included in forming suspicion, but every cop is an individual human being with human flaws and personal opinions. One of the crappiest things about this job is watching some cops be bad at their job. Story 17. As a police officer, I have become accustomed to people acting differently in my presence. Whether it's on the road or walking down a street or shopping mall, I've noticed that everyone has a different response to walking by a police officer. Some people will avert their eyes and walk a little faster, others will go out of their way to acknowledge me, giving me an awkward smile and a wave. Some, however, will start acting jittery and furtive, moving their hands awkwardly, looking all sorts of directions. If there is nothing to point to the fact that they committed an offense, I try to act friendly, and I let them know I'm here to help and look out after their safety. I'll give them a big smile that lets them know that, hey, we're on the same team. Unless they're black, in which case I'll fire at them. Other than that, I just try to remember that a law enforcement officer can cause nervous reactions for people, and I shouldn't take that as a sign of wrongdoing. Story 18. I'm a chronic speeder, always 5 miles per hour over, but usually closer to 10, 15, 20 miles per hour over. In the last 6 years, I've gotten pulled over 5 times, and only once was I given a ticket, and incidentally, that was for 20 miles per hour over the limit, and he wrote down 19 miles per hour over so I could still take stop class. Basically, credit my good fortune to always being honest. If they ask how fast I was going, I tell them. If they ask me if I speed often, I usually tell them usually 5 miles per hour over at least. Otherwise, I keep my hands on the wheel and I just hope for the best. I've nothing to hide, so I have no nervousness or fear, just a slight hope that they will take pity and give me another warning, even though I definitely don't deserve it by now. Story 19. In college, riding to a movie theater with 5 dudes in a small car, our driver rolls through a ride on red and a cop pulls us over. My buddy in the middle back seat is a little nervous, IDK if this is factored in, but he is non-white, and starts to fidget with his hands a bit. No big deal, right? The cop is approaching the driver window when bam, 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 there are loud noises against my window, back right. Second cop is rapping his flashlight against the window, gesturing towards my buddy, fidgeting with his hands in his hoodie pocket. What you got there? It's a candle. He pulls out a full-size Yankee candle from his hoodie pocket that none of us knew he had. All that for a candle, son? Keep your hands out of your pockets until we're done. Everyone giggled nervously and the cop let the driver go with a warning. No freaking clue why he had a candle, but he was so nervous simply because he was riding in the car that got pulled over. He was doing absolutely nothing wrong. Cops just make people crazy. Story 20. Buddy of mine used to work for the UN, often going to some real colorful countries. Lots of stories of ridiculous border/military crossings and interrogations, etc. Anyway, he had to come back home to get a new passport. His was full, and on his way through U.S. Customs, got called into the back room. Now, the guy has had child soldiers pull weapons on him in the past, so the nice U.S. Customs staff really didn't register on his discomfort meter. So as a result, he was cool as a cucumber, which apparently is a bad thing to do with Western customs when they take you into the back room as they expect you to be a bit uncomfortable, and only a pro would be as cool as a cucumber. As a result, he was in the back room for the better part of the day and missed multiple flights, as they were totally convinced something was amiss as a direct result of not acting self-conscious. And if you're learning a thing or two from this video so far, please do me a favor and remember to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 21. Not a cop, but I am a government compliance inspector. Lots of people treat me like I'm the police and I can bring a police officer with me if I need to or if I want one. I don't have a magic answer to this. Suspicious people tend to show it with their actions. They'll make excuses why I can't be escorted around that day or why we can't go to that part of the facility or why I can't see the paperwork, stuff like that. The excuses are usually fairly transparent. Nervous people tend to talk a lot or overshare things. They'll offer solutions to problems they see as problems, legitimate or not. Not just things I point out, like I once had a guy point out and apologize that some of the records were in a different color ink on different days. I hadn't even noticed. Story 22. I always struggled with anxiety in social situations, made meeting girls difficult. At age 26, I decided to try my hand at online dating. Bought a premium account on Cupid.com, met a girl who was amazing. We chatted online for 3 months before I worked up the nerve to meet her face to face. My family wished me luck as I headed out. On the way up the interstate, there's a sign that says there's an ID stop 1 mile ahead. I think to myself, all right, no big deal, this is my exit. And I pull off onto the exit that is about 100 yards behind the sign. They were clearly expecting bad guys to pull off onto that exit because ahead of me were like 12, 14 police cars, several of which were K9 units. I slow to a stop, roll my window down. The officer asks for my ID and where I'm heading. I say, oh, well, I'm actually heading out to meet a girl. And he replies, oh, really? Yeah, we've been talking on the internet for a few months and I'm finally going to meet her. The officer smiles and says, I was wondering why you were so shaky when you handed me your ID. Another officer walks over to see what's going on. The first officer says, hey, this guy's about to go on a first date. He's nervous. The second officer jokingly says, if he's nervous, he may be hiding something. The first officer laughs, pats the door frame, hands me back my ID, and says, you're going to have fun. Good luck. The situation made a great icebreaker upon meeting my online crush. We enjoyed our evening and hit it off. That was like 12 years ago, and we've been married for 10 of those. All right, who would have thought that cops were the juicy grease that make online matchups work out actually in real life? Let me know if you have a similar story in the comments section below. On to the next one. Story 23. Not a cop, but I have had really good interactions while pulled over, even though I am nervous. The nervousness comes from the fact that it feels like I'm being judged for doing something wrong, even though it is just a simple speeding ticket. It just feels like you're being heavily scrutinized. One of the things that I noticed was that the cops that I interacted with would often end a sentence with a question, even when it was a command. For example, do me a favor and wait right here while I run your info. It will only be a few minutes, okay? Simply by asking, okay, makes me a lot less nervous, even if I think I am going to get the ticket. It isn't a rational thought, it is just pure emotion at that point. My belief is that the cops can sort of tell based on your reactions to little things in the conversation. Someone who was a threat would still be ultra tense if they were asked if they were okay, whereas someone like me, who is just nervous about being pulled over, period, is more or less relieved that the cop isn't going to be mean, even if we get the ticket. Again, my response shouldn't be taken as an actual answer to your question, given that this is all anecdotal information. Another thing that I have noticed is that they will ask you simple questions about what you are up to when they see that you are nervous. A nervous person with something to hide has a much harder time lying, whereas a regular nervous person is a little relieved to be chatting at a more human level. The cop can ask you what you were planning to do, where you were going or coming from, etc. Anything that is otherwise just chit-chat, but imagine the bullets a bad guy would be sweating at that point, trying to come up with false answers. I have a car that appears to be not street legal, but it is, and has been pulled over a dozen times, yet I still get nervous whenever I hear the sirens. It is a physical reaction, even when I think I have done nothing wrong. I think the majority of cops out there understand this phenomenon and want to make it easier, especially for themselves when confronting a pulled over driver. Story 24. It really doesn't matter. If I'm pulling you over, I'll inform a jittery suspect to take a breath, remain calm, and keep his or her hands in clear sight. If they fail to comply with my requests, I'll draw my weapon to a low ready position and maintain a visual of the suspect from behind the B pillar of their vehicle. I would then request backup and maintain verbal contact with the suspect from this position. Honestly, loud, direct, and profane language can snap people back to reality, i.e., let me see your freaking hands now, as opposed to the PC, sir, man, please show me your hands, as they teach in the academy. If the situation is really dicey, I'll just perform a felony stop and order the occupants out of the car individually over my radio car's PA. With the headlights and takedown lights fixated on the subject's vehicle, the suspect won't be able to obtain a clear visual of the officer. Story 25. Late to the party, so probably buried, but whatever. Obligatory, not a cop, but I work in a public defender's office, and oftentimes in the police reports for motor vehicle stops, the officers make note of the nervousness of the motorists being out of the ordinary. Things described like profuse sweating, trembling hands, refuse to make eye contact, etc. Of course, officers' training also comes into play, and they can tell when someone is either under the influence. Our county has a ridiculous problem, not that we're at all unique in that regard, unfortunately, and many of our clients will have substances on them in the car when they get stopped or will have recently used before getting stopped, and officers will note things like constricted pupils, slow or slurred speech, or trying to not show their arms to avoid seeing track marks. More often than not, a cop should be able to tell if you're just generally nervous around a cop, or if you're giving off the vibe that you're trying to keep them from finding out something they shouldn't. Of course, that's not the case for all of them, obviously, but I guess as a general rule of thumb. Story 26. Real cop here. Worked in Philly for 6 years in Kensington, and now I'm in the burbs living on Easy Street. When I was in Philly, you needed to learn people's ways. You would patrol the area multiple times, and you would notice that some people never left. Also, you'll notice that these same people would be out regardless of weather. Anyway, it took a while at first, but with time, you start to find out who's a dealer and who isn't. Dealers were annoying to get in Philly because they had a ton of looks that put blocks away, and they never kept the substances on them. I remember we would drive early Sunday mornings the wrong way to get the jump on people. Stolen cars were a little easier. I probably got about 20 plus stolen vehicles in Philadelphia the last 2 years I was there. People in stolen cars tend to give a oh crap look. Another giveaway is when you have a ton of young kids in a car. Seriously, it's a stolen car a ton of times in the hood. 2 weeks before I left, I was working solo and I saw 4 kids in a Sonata park on the side. By the time I turned around, they were on the move. I caught up to the car and they quickly took off. Long story short, it was stolen. Some people were really good at getting weapons. They were able to read people's stance and notice that they walked a different manner when someone had a weapon on their waistband. I was never too good at that and only got maybe 12.5 guns while I worked in Philly. Now working in the burbs, it's a lot less hectic. I get paid more and literally do about 1/20th the amount of work. To me, it seems unfair, but whatever. I still enjoy my job, but if I had to pick where to work, I would pick Philly. It feels like real police work. But it is nice in the burbs that I can interact with the community more. Story 27. I work loss prevention. Not the same, but we use similar influences. For instance, I'm not watching little Jamal walking around my store. I'm watching a juvenile enter a high loss department wearing a backpack in the middle of summer. Or when somebody walks into a department and spends a whole 2 seconds to select their items, it piques our interest and we watch. Both cops and ourselves are looking for what means you have to commit crimes, opportunities to do so, and the behavior that suggests it. We don't care that you're a black person who is acting nervous around our uniform security. What we care about is that you're acting nervous with an armload of my clothing while there's a car running outside. I bet they have a whole flow chart for this. Backpack, check. Nervous, check. Car running, jackpot. Story 28. I'm a correctional officer, so it's different than the streets, but in prison, everyone is generally suspicious, but they all haven't necessarily done something recently, and some are more suspicious than others. Offenders that did something do a few things. Sometimes they rat on themselves so someone else doesn't take the fall for what they did, because otherwise they'll probably get jumped. Sometimes they'll make every effort not to look at you, super obvious. If they've stolen something, they'll attempt to hide the object on their opposite side as they pass you. Again, super obvious, they think we're idiots. There are the lifelong con artists, of course, who think they're real smooth, but generally we know when they're trying to play us. Some officers and staff are more open to being compromised in this way, but ultimately I think the majority know which offender is known for what. There are the new offenders who don't know how to act yet, just like new COs, and they're the funniest because they generally act around cops the same way they did on the street, trying to crack jokes nervously or avoiding contact or yelling obscenities at us. Story 29. Former law enforcement here. I didn't see many answers from actual cops or police, so I threw one out there. Your question really gets at the heart of why cops come off like schmucks and may seem to overreact sometimes, because most interactions with police progress quickly from initial contact to the officer having a fairly good idea of what's going on and who's the bad guy and who's not. The real answer is that you don't know the difference at the beginning, so cops are trained and learn to act standoffish and are hyper-aware in order to protect themselves as well as innocent bystanders. By having this ultra-vigilant attitude, you have a better chance of staying alive during that 1 in 1,000 interactions where the person you're talking to actually means to do you harm instead of just run from you or just comply and act reasonable. The short answer, after a couple of years of reading people, you start to learn how to pick out the average nervous, law-abiding citizen and the person who's hiding something. It's almost always something different, where the person came from, something off about how the vehicle they're in, something about how they look or don't look at you, the people they are with, past experiences with the person, how they start driving when they see you. I could go on and on. Cops have to be able to articulate reasonable suspicion and probable cause and the reasons they do what they do, but there are often dozens of reasons that convince you someone is guilty rather than just another nervous good person. Story 30. Genuinely suspicious people will be one of two things: over-friendly, chatty, call you mate, or express their deep respect for what you do, but also take longer to answer your questions. Like they'll have to think about what to say, or they will be cagey, aggressive, defensive, and rude, and not answer any of your questions, even just asking their name. These may well also be wearing a huge fat sign saying guilty. Self conscious idiots are open to the necessary degree and will often want to get on with their day but have no real issue with you chatting to them for any reason. They will respond to questions quite quickly as they are not having to spend time thinking about what to say. This has been my experience in the UK. Story 31 was on the other side, but personally, when I was a very naughty young man, I just imagined all the normal things I'd be about to do instead of the copious amounts of substance I was carrying. Some small things go a long way, like walking my dogs was always a chore. With a pit bull and a Roddy and being heavily tattooed, I knew I would be judged and looked at, so I made a point about my dogs being the best behaved around. They walked at my heel, I wasn't dragged, they would sit at the edge of the road before we crossed, they would be friendly with other dogs and come when called. In my opinion, small things like making my dog sit when crossing the road went a long way in my neighbors' eyes, as making me seem like a more responsible person than I really was, and also, in my opinion, contributed to me having no police breaking down my door when many other places in that neighborhood did. I taught my housemates this, it's all about appearances. It's fun to look cool walking your huge mean dogs down the street, straining at their leash, but it leaves a bad impression and the likelihood of a friendly tip-off increases. Well-behaved dogs impress people and implies you're a good/responsible person. Story 32. I was in a not-at-fault accident a year or so ago and was shaken up at the scene. The girl started lying immediately about what she did, and I sensed it as soon as the cop came back to me from talking with her first. I was incensed. It was late. I had been in a $20,000 accident with my car totaled in a busy intersection, and he came to me all suspicious. I stammered a bit out of frustration, and lo and behold, the police report showed me as distracted when I did nothing wrong. I suspect due to me still processing what occurred with the woman's statement, resulting in my frustration level going through the roof, was enough for him to suspect me of something, although he couldn't say what it was. Luckily, the woman ended up admitting it after I stuck with my story, and came up with several contradictions regarding the light sequence and how what she stated happened couldn't have physically happened, and it worked. She said she had a green arrow when making a left through an intersection. She had turned left on a solid green where you must yield by law to oncoming traffic before entering the intersection. At this particular intersection, there is even a sign that requires an arrow to turn left. Good example regarding the top comment, since this officer made a gut call that was wrong, which could have affected my life and auto insurance rates for the next several years, all on an incorrect gut call. Took about a week while I was in limbo. I was damned if I was going to make a claim on my insurance. I live in an at-fault state. Story 33. Pulled over for being lost in the wrong neighborhood. Was relieved as I did not have a GPS at the time. Horribly lost, hoping the cop that had been tailing me for the last mile would pull me over to get directions. Wants to know why a white boy like me is in a neighborhood like this. I explain I'm lost, doesn't believe me, says I'm here for substances. My whole attitude changed because I'm suddenly nervous. Why would he think that? And realizing this could go badly. He says only guilty people act nervous. He ends up calling a K9 unit to search my car. The cop is really cool. We chat and he apologized for first cop being a schmuck. After search, he gives me directions on how to get to my destination. Good cop, bad cop is real. Story 34. Got pulled over going down a country road. The speed limit had been 35 because the road was curvy. And when it straightened out, I assumed it went up to 45. I was wrong. I passed a cruiser going the opposite direction and a split second later saw the speed sign. Of course, he did a U-turn, flipped lights on, etc. and pulled me over. Now, here's where it gets interesting. My friend and I had been target practicing when it started to rain. We had quickly put all our pistols, rifles, and shotguns in the back seat to keep them from getting wet. But it stopped raining after just a few minutes. Well, an officer comes up to me and I'm wondering if it's my last day on earth. I got my license and concealed carry permit out, hands at 10 and 2. As he approaches, even before he says anything, I ease both hands out the window and say, I've got a lot of guns in the back seat. He was just noticing that fact for himself and said, I need both of you to keep your hands visible and don't move. He takes my IDs and walks backwards to his cruiser, keeping his eyes on us and one hand hovering over his own pistol. Yes, sir, I ain't moving a friggin' muscle. My hands are still sticking out the window, and we're expecting a SWAT team to arrive at any moment. After like a few million years and a few gallons of sweat, the cop comes back and says something like, all right, everything checks out. The heck you driving around with all those guns for? We explain the target practicing, brief rain, me expecting the speed limit to have increased when it didn't, etc. He then starts chatting with me about how much harder it is to get a CCW in my state than the one we were in, etc. My sphincter was slowly beginning to relax, but bet your my hands were still visible. Didn't even get a speeding ticket or a written warning, though. Maybe not even a verbal one, but my friend and I are white, so there's that. Story 35. CO here. If anyone is going to get pedantic over this, we and police deal with the same kind of liars. You honestly just learn to tell over time if someone is BSing you or not. In my line of work, I deal with very rigid structure and routines, and you learn over time when something is out of place. Like this inmate over here is usually on the phone because he is representing himself. So why is he constantly going over to that cell when I never see him hang out with the inmate housed there in the common areas? That's the biggest way to spot suspicious activity because your spidey sense, yes, we do call it this, goes off. I have a lot of weirdos on my unit, but they have their routines they go about, even if it's bugging me all the time over dumb stuff that you pay attention towards. As for the guys that lie to your face, like I said, you pick up over time. Usually your gut instinct is right. I find if I talk to an inmate and then they go silent, it's because they are in that don't rat mindset and deny via silence. If they are way too passionate and quick to answer in their replies, that's my big red flag. Story 36. Not a cop, but I wanted to share my oh crap, I'm being pulled over routine that has always helped me maintain my cool and has, more often than not, gotten me out of some tickets. Once an officer makes it known that I'm being stopped, I take a second before I do anything to avoid making a jerk reaction that may or may not ping on their mental radar. Once I'm collected, this usually takes 2 to 3 seconds. I use my signals to pull over to a safe location. Once I've pulled over, I turn my hazard lights on. If it's night, this is when I'll turn my cabin lights on. After activating my appropriate lights, I'll roll all 4 of my vehicle's windows down halfway, but the driver's window all of the way down. Then I'll turn my vehicle off and place both hands on the steering wheel. And by this point, I'm calm and collected enough to speak with the officer in a near normal tone, volume, and speed, which lends itself to a much smoother traffic stop. As I've said before, this process helps keep me calm and helps put the officer at ease, which is pretty useful when wanting to avoid a speeding ticket. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.